Richard and Nancy are from two very different worlds. Nancy grew up in the toniest neighborhood in all of Texas, a world of debutantes, country clubs, big money, and even bigger egos. Her father, William Dillard, is a successful real estate developer, known around Dallas as Big Daddy, a testament to his influence and financial clout. Richard Lyon, on the other hand, hails from mundane, middle-class Connecticut.
I had the impression that his upbringing was very different. Maybe it was culture shock for him at first. It was a lot different world than I think that he was used to.
Relationship expert Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell see the class difference as a crucial element of this marriage.
Nancy was raised really at the top of the hierarchy, and Richard was much more of a simple guy, raised with simple things. And those two things are bound to create problems between them.
I think that in some ways he was probably particularly attractive to her precisely because he seemed to have a little bit looser approach to life. When people are raised differently, they have different expectations about what life will be like as adults and when they're married. And he could feel resentful that he's having all kinds of pressures that he never feels he signed up for.
Despite Nancy's family money, the couple adopt a surprisingly frugal lifestyle.
Very humble, not like a lot of people with old money that were snooty and seemed to be above everybody else. They had a house in Highland Park, but it was a duplex, very simple lifestyle. Richard drove an old '65 Mustang, and it was not a classic car. It was an old beat-up car that the floorboards were all rusted out. He had to put rubber floor mats in there to keep, water and mud from coming up on his suit legs. It was pretty funny, actually.
This couple may be low-key, but their careers are on the up and up. Big Daddy finds them well-paid jobs in real estate.
Richard, frankly, helped me get started. And the first project, one of my biggest concerns was cash flow. And so the first draw I turned in to him, the application for payment, he forgot to process it. And I was most upset. And I went into his office and sat down, and I was quite angry. And he reached in his coat pocket and pulled out a checkbook and wrote me a personal check. And I had never done business with anybody like that stood behind what they said. It really made an impression, a strong impression on me.
After 7 years of marriage, the Lyons have two beautiful daughters, doted on by both mother and father. And this being Park Cities, they hire a nanny to look after them, Lynn Pease Woods.
I thought it was a wonderful family to work for. When I first started working for them, I just thought that they were an average family. I didn't really know how much Oriental rugs or antique furniture cost or George Jensen silver. And I realized later that there must be some finances there.
1989. Everything is perfect, at least on the outside. But even for a modern couple like Richard and Nancy, class casts an ever-present shadow.
I think Richard probably did have a hard time feeling accepted. Whether he was being accepted or not, I think feeling like you were accepted if you came from a different background. Being dropped down in the middle of the Park Cities when you're not used to that kind of life can be very intimidating and overwhelming. But it can also be a bit addictive once you get into the lifestyle.
Whether it's the influence of Park Cities or the pressure of work, Lynn finds that Nancy's attitude is starting to change, for the worse.
She always wanted to make sure she got her money's worth from me. She would come home and she would say, "Lynn, what did you do this morning?" And I would go through, well, I made the fruit salad, and she said, well, that shouldn't take that much time.
Perhaps Nancy resents Lynn for her strong emotional bond with their two young daughters.
I didn't think she valued me as much as she should because I adored her children so much.
But Lynn finds Richard friendlier and more generous.
He was nice to me. Sometimes very nice, like he would cook me dinner before I got there on a Saturday night to babysit for them while they went out.
There's also some friction within the marriage. Nancy insists that her husband keep up appearances and stay true to the spirit of posh Park cities.
Every morning, she picked out his suit and his tie because she liked him to look a certain way. She liked him to do things a certain way. Like he liked to mow the front yard. And she said, "Richard, you can't do that. We have a yard man to do that." She could be controlling.
Women have this bad habit of wanting to be the fixers. We think that if we try enough things, if we smile enough, if we do what we think is right, we might be able to get the man to change. And I think Nancy lived that way almost every day.
But Richard is becoming increasingly secretive and suspicious. It all started so well for Nancy and Richard Lyon. Friends and family witnessed the happy marriage firsthand.
They seemed to have lots of friends. They seemed to enjoy each other.
Very warm and friendly, very caring for each other. Richard would pull her chair out for her to sit her down at the dinner table, you know. Very classy. I never saw them raise their voices to each other at all. Very respectful.
I personally wasn't attracted to him at all, but I could see where Nancy would be. I think other women would be attracted to him. He was sensitive and kind.
After Nancy's startling confession that she had been sexually intimate with her brother as a young teenager, Richard seeks the affections of a younger woman. A pretty, smart blonde contractor named Ann Gaisford.
He just didn't strike me as that type at all, and we were working crazy hours. I don't know how he had time to have an affair, frankly. It really surprised me, shocked me, actually.
Ann Gaisford finds a mentor and friend in Richard Lyon, and finally, a lover. A one-night stand turns into a fling, and the fling turns into an affair. But Richard is careless, and Nancy becomes suspicious.
She called Richard once when he was on a business trip to New York, and it wasn't a business trip. He was at a hotel with a mistress, and Nancy found out, and she was very upset. And then she had sweatshirts delivered, 2 sweatshirts with Harvard on them. They weren't meant to be delivered to the house because Richard had ordered them for him and his mistress.
As the torrid affair intensifies, Richard makes no real attempt to keep it a secret.
I think it was devastating for Nancy that Richard was so open about the affair. She comes from a family where image is important. And here, not only is her husband cheating on her, but he's talking about it.
Yeah, it would be horrible. At least if the spouse is trying to hide the infidelity, one could delude oneself into thinking that part of the reason is to try to spare them the hurt involved. But when the person is being open about it, there's an intentional infliction of harm involved in that.
After 6 months of this humiliation, Nancy has had enough. She orders Richard to get out. Soon after Christmas 1989, Richard packs his bags and leaves his wife and 2 daughters.
I left her crying every day. She was very sad about it. She wanted her marriage to work.
As winter turns into spring, Nancy is left alone to deal with a new problem at their Shenandoah Avenue home. Apparently, there's an infestation of fire ants, a common pest in Texas, even in the posh suburbs of Park cities. Nancy turns to Richard and asks for help. Perhaps the fire ants are simply an excuse to bring Richard back into the family home. If so, it doesn't work. As her husband openly continues the affair, his behavior becomes increasingly excessive. Richard is spending uncontrollably on cars, expensive restaurants, and gifts for Anne, including a $5,000 Cartier ring. Nancy Lyon has endured her husband's infidelity, but is determined to make her marriage work. By January 1991, just as the marriage seems to be getting back on track, the unexplained nausea that has been plaguing her for months becomes impossible to endure. As her pain becomes severe, Richard rushes his wife to the hospital. A family friend, Gary Perkins, finds him in a state of shock.
He seemed very distraught, very upset, very worried about what was going on. Did not seem himself at all.
Dr. Ali Bagheri, then a resident at the Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas, is the first doctor to see Nancy.
I first examined her, I was in the emergency room that morning when I came on, and she was a lot of distress, and she was very sick. She was in a lot of pain, and she was having a lot of nausea, vomiting.
The symptoms are typical of a severe stomach flu, but Dr. Bagheri believes she's suffering from something more serious.
She was writhing in pain, and she kept asking, please help me, please help me. And she had a lot of abnormalities in her electrolytes, and she also, her liver enzymes were very, very sky high, very elevated.
Dr. Bagheri orders a battery of tests, suspecting Nancy has ingested something toxic.
I came out of her room, and her husband, Richard, arrived, and I talked to him outside the room. He introduced himself. And then I told him we had also sent some additional tests. And I said, well, this is the checking for heavy metals, including like lead, mercury, and the minute I say arsenic, his pupils dilated. I mean, I was looking right in his face, and he look on his face, he goes, what makes you think about the heavy metals and arsenic and so on? Why are you checking for those things? I said, well, nothing. I mean, just checking those for the sake of completeness.
Nancy's father, William Dillard, seeks out Dr. Bagheri with what he believes is some vital information.
So he pulled me to the side. He goes, well, I didn't know if you knew this, but Nancy and Richard, they've been having some rough times in their marriage and marital problems, and they've actually been separated recently.
Dillard tells the doctor about the bottle of wine given to Nancy 4 months earlier, which he believes made her sick.
She took the bottle in and she drank some of that wine. And she later on became very ill, and she was throwing up. She had some nausea, vomiting, so on.
Suddenly, an unexplained illness may be turning into something far more sinister. At this point, Richard and the Dillard family have a very tough decision to make, whether to take her off life support.
My intern approached me, came to me and said, hey, everybody have decided to withdraw care on Nancy, and her husband came to me and they have discussed it all, and that was their decision.
Something's not right. Dr. Bagheri decides to ask whether Nancy's parents agree with the decision.
And I understand you all had made the decision to stop life support and turning off all the medications. And he said, no, who told you that? He had no knowledge of this. By then, I knew there was something, I had a very high level of suspicion, and I knew there was something fishy going on.
Richard's request raises an immediate red flag for Dr. Bagheri. He decides to alert the authorities of his suspicions.
So I called the medical examiner's office, and I told him, listen, I have a patient here, and she's critically ill, and I suspect foul play.
The family disagreement becomes moot as Nancy suffers total organ failure. Within a few hours, her heart stops and she dies. News of the doctor's suspicions have now reached the ears of the Dallas Police Department. Detectives pay Dr. Bagari a visit.
They asked me everything from the beginning till the end, what had happened.
And what Dr. Bagari has to say will shock investigators. He recounts the last conversation they had before Nancy slipped into a coma. She told him that she'd taken unmarked pills given to her by Richard.
She said, well, he has been giving me this capsules, and he said, these are vitamins, these are good for you.
She also tells Dr. Bagari about an outing to the movies. Richard bought her a soda with something suspicious floating on top.
It was dark in the theater, and then she said she took a sip out of it, and she said it tasted awful. And she looked in the cup, and then there was a powder, and it was like a powdered aspirin.
Finally, the test results come back. The heavy metal screen confirms the worst. Nancy has been poisoned with arsenic.
Her urine arsenic level was sky high, very elevated. So, I mean, it was arsenic poisoning. And then you put all the pieces of puzzle together, the labs, everything else is all fit.
Arsenic kills slowly and painfully. At first, there are headaches, vomiting, and diarrhea. Then convulsions and cramp. Lungs, kidneys, and the liver start to fail. With high doses, coma and death are inevitable. Nancy Lyon dies from a poison that used to be called inheritance powder.
The medical examiner, they called it the cause of death was acute on chronic arsenic poisoning. They had found arsenic in all her organs, including her liver, her spleen, her lungs, her hair, nails, every organ in her body.
The autopsy proves that the poison was ingested over many months. Her death, if it proves to be murder, amounts to a long and deliberate act of homicide. The case becomes a criminal investigation, and the police focus on the most obvious suspect. 4 months after Nancy's death, Richard Lyon is charged with first-degree murder. Friends and neighbors are stunned.
I couldn't believe who would have poisoned her. I didn't assume it was Richard. I didn't know how she got poisoned.
I was shocked and then trying to process that information in my mind, like how on earth could that happen? Or I couldn't believe that they had arrested him. You know, it really upset me, like what on earth is going on?
And when the trial begins, it causes a sensation.
You couldn't go to a party or a gathering or a school or community event in the Park Cities without hearing about the trial and the story. You couldn't. Everyone was talking about it.
The trial has been underway barely a few hours when Guthrie introduces his first suspect, Nancy's brother, Bill Jr. The Dillard dirty laundry is hung out in full view of Dallas society. Under cross-examination, Nancy's father admits that incest between Nancy and Bill Jr. took place, but dismisses it as two kids playing doctor.
Defense attorney goes up and he hands the father a stack of paper that I'd never seen before, the father had never seen before, and asked him to identify it. And he said, well, is that Nancy's handwriting? And he said, yes, it was. And then they start reading off the paper. And I'm kind of at that point a little helpless because I'm not sure what all it says.
The papers are pages from Nancy's handwritten notebook. The note suggests that Nancy was terrified that her brother wanted revenge after she revealed their incestuous past. It reads, fear of reprisal, fear of Bill and what his desires are, sex, sick sex, incestuous with me, my girls. It makes Bill Jr. a possible suspect in the murder of his sister.
So I had to just sit there and just act like I knew what was happening and everything was fine. And I'd seen enough of her handwriting to know it did look like hers. And I thought, there's got to be some way either to disprove some of this stuff or he's not guilty. And we got the wrong guy sitting here.
I do think it's possible that Nancy's brother harbored anger towards her. She humiliated him in the family. And over time, he may have grown angry. However, I do not believe that his anger would have resulted in a long-term poisoning.
Yeah, it would have been a rage killing if it were the brother, in my opinion. One single violent incident.
The defense appears to have the advantage, but a key witness is about to change the course of this trial. Charles Couch, the chemical company owner, is supposed to confirm to the court that the receipt for arsenic, signed by Nancy, is genuine. Much to the surprise of Richard's attorney, Couch takes a good look and says the receipt is a fake.
Well, it looked like it had been photoshopped, you know. Somebody had typed neatly, you know, and everything, and somebody came by and said, oh, we'll doctor this up, you know. It was kind of funny, you know.
He said, I did not sell that arsenic. Those are not my receipts. And I recall his statement was that I have a beautiful handwriting and I like my handwriting, or something to that effect. And so I write all my own receipts by hand. And this is a typed receipt. This is a fake.
And once doubt is cast on one crucial piece of evidence, Richard's house of cards begins to topple. The incest note implicating Nancy's brother is also shown to be a forgery, and the suspicion surrounding Bill Jr. is entirely lifted.
He went back and added in the incest part in his handwriting, but to look like Nancy's, to get that in front of the jury.
As the trial went on, I started having doubts. I was there a couple of different times to listen to the trial and the way things were being conducted. And that's when I started questioning, you know, what's going on here, and this certainly doesn't look good.
Whatever momentum they might have built, it was taken out from under them because it looked like what they put on was just a lie. And at that point, you know, it's probably difficult for a jury to believe the defendant or the lawyer.
Indisputable evidence is mounting against Richard Lyon. The prosecution shows that Richard amassed a smorgasbord of potential poisons. Nancy's vitamin pills are analyzed and found to contain barium carbonate, a compound used in rat poison. Analysis of prescription drug capsules found in her bathroom cabinet reveals the presence of cyanide. There is also a paper trail. Richard used his own name to order the poisons and paid with personal checks.
The first thing most people do would be to, you know, you wipe your fingerprints off things, you clean up your tracks when you leave. I mean, this was a long, ongoing killing, and he made some very elementary mistakes.
There were a lot of circumstantial evidence, but when you tally it up, it was pretty devastating.
For somebody who is as intelligent as Richard, he was sloppy. He left a paper trail that ultimately led to his conviction. One of the things that we know about psychopaths is that they aren't necessarily intelligent. What they are is emotionally intelligent. They're really good at reading people and manipulating situations, but that doesn't mean that they're good at crossing their T's and dotting their I's when it comes to actually trying to kill someone.
Well, I think that many people were fooled by Richard for a long time. So every time you hear a story of a murder or a shooting and the person's neighbor says, oh, he was such a nice guy, I'm so surprised. Really all that shows is just how little they knew the person. It doesn't show that a really nice, wonderful person snapped.
Despite moments of doubt and paranoia, Nancy did nothing to prevent her own murder.
I think she couldn't really believe it herself, and if she told people, they would think that she was crazy. I just kind of an inability to accept it because it was so far out. I don't think most people really expect a loved one or someone that they've loved and had children with, or a family member to hurt them. And so I think that part of her believed it, part of her down in her knew it, and part of it didn't want to believe it. And part of her just said, I'm not going to believe it.
You know, in the beginning of the trial, I was not convinced that he had killed Nancy. And I still am not sure that they proved it in trial. I think at the end of it, I came to the conclusion that, yeah, I guess he probably did it, but I'm not sure that the prosecution truly proved that he did it.
The jury needs no more convincing. After a 3-week trial, they find Richard Lyon guilty of first-degree murder. Richard is the only person in the courtroom who appears to be surprised.
You know, there's all kinds of murders. You know, people die in different ways. You know, arsenic is something that you have to plan to do. You have to acquire it. You have to get the guts up to deliver it, and you have to figure out a delivery method. And you have to do all those things, and then it works a little by little by little, so you have to be committed to keep doing it. You know, to me, that's just as personal as a stabbing or strangulation. And in this case, you're watching your wife, the mother of your children, slowly die, and you just keep giving doses and doses and doses until you accomplish your goal. To poison somebody over a period of time like that, that's pretty dastardly as far as I'm concerned. And I didn't really see any option other than the maximum sentence. That's what I thought was appropriate, and that's what I assessed.
To the relief of the Dillard family, Richard Lyon is sentenced to life. Nancy's brother, Bill Jr., is granted custody of the Lyons' 2 daughters. Richard continues to protest his innocence.
He just never seemed like that kind of person at all. I can't even fathom how that could happen. It still is just unbelievable to me.
Oh, I was sad. I was sad when they arrested him. I was sad when he was convicted, because that was the end of what I had thought as a very wonderful, loving family.